Hello and welcome to Never Mind the Ballots. Brothels, sex dolls and what we're describing as an intimate act too rude to print in a family newspaper. Lifting the lid on the sordid secrets of the last Tory government is the ex-Chief Whip Simon Hart. He's got a new book out. It's called Ungovernable. And he's here today looking remarkably casual in your retirement. Simon, I've read a lot of the book. I've certainly read the saucier extracts of the book. It sounds like the last Tory government were running around like something out of a carry-on film, and no wonder they kicked you out of office, right?
Well, it's not, by the way, just a Tory government. This is
right.
The things we experience, I think, were being experienced by Keir Starmer now. But so it's not particularly unique, as I say, to one party or another. But it is serious.
Yeah.
And the question I ask really in the book is how we went from an unassailable majority in December 19 to being unelectable in July 2024 and 3 prime ministers later. And unless we address that, unless we ask ourselves, it wasn't about the date of the election or some, tax policy. It was much more fundamental than that. We have to confront it. We have to confront it.
We'll get into the seriousness and the future of the Tory party, etc. in a moment. But let's just rattle through a couple of the seedier bits of your work. You were in charge of discipline for a couple of years of the Tory party. You were the chief whip. The whips, as our readers and viewers will know, keep the order, or meant to keep the order in the party. But, you've got an MP waking up in a brothel being bribed by a woman he thought was a KGB agent. You've got Jimmy Savile fancy dress. You've got sex dolls. You've got, I'm not going to say the other bit, but, what is going on?
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, it's, although it's quite, you could say that it's music, you and I having a bit of a sort of, jaw-dropping moment about it. But actually it was more intended to be, you couldn't make it up stuff, rather than, isn't this funny, and me trying to justify it. I needed, I felt that it needed to be illustrated, because this is a problem. We have a problem, not in just generally. We have a wider issue around how we support and mentor and get people through their political lives.
What was the most shocking thing? You got, first of all, getting the phone call from the Prime Minister who appointed you Chief Whip. How long into the job did you just go, what the hell have I signed up for?
I think we always used to keep a slot in the diary, literally every day, for we'd rather.
What happened the night before?
It was called Shit Happens.
Shit Happens.
We had a Shit Happens.
Quite literally in one of the stories.
Because something would come through the door. Now listen, we had big workplace, 650 MPs, several thousand parliamentary staffers, drawn from all corners of the earth, all sorts of backgrounds. We're bound to have the same workplace problems as anybody else.
You say that, but it doesn't. Can't think of many workplaces where a member of staff would be able to phone up what is essentially one of his bosses and say, I've just been blackmailed by a hooker. I don't know where I am. I'm in a brothel and I've lost all my clothes.
Yeah. This is,
that's a unique thing to politicians to get away with, right? And he did get away with it.
Well, I think there are literally examples like this in every workplace in the land. I know people might not want to confront that, but this is not unique to politics. However, what I'm not trying to say is it's perfectly normal, you're nothing to see here. And the fact is, we have to ask, how do we get to a position where people end up in that predicament? And in some cases it's mischief, but in some cases it isn't. And one of the things that I really did notice in my time in the Whip's office is a lot of the things which beset people were actually sad and tragic, and as a result of all sorts of complicated problems for which either they or we were not prepared. And actually the serious point here is, when the wheels fell off for people, which it does, let's say, in any job.
It seems to do it quite spectacularly.
Are we, do we have the wherewithal? What are the, do we have the support and measures in place to help them? And I'm not sure we completely did.
You do have a sort of pastoral care role. You are essentially both, shopkeeper, discipline enforcer, and sort of, by the sounds of it, shrink and counsellor to a pretty unique group of people. I'm slightly two minds about this book, and I think there's been some reaction to it. Do you think it's fair, though, in the importance of that role that you have, that, is it going to stop people going to the Whips with serious problems if they think it's going to end up in a book in 6 months' time?
No, because they didn't come to us really anyway. We tended to find things out rather than necessarily...
Did you have a sort of network of spies?
Well, people talk. People talk. And
they talk to journalists as well.
I'm glad they do. I mean, most of the examples, colourful though they are anonymised in the book.
Yeah, I mean, but everyone knows who they are. I know who they are from it's done the rounds since the book, though, hasn't it?
Well, you might say that, or you might think that. But so But the trouble is, if we just sit forevermore, in some kind of self-imposed silence, where we never discuss these things, it's something which you just sort of leave out of sight, and say that we will never address the root problems and the fundamental causes, and we will continue to end up in the same position as we have done in this instance. And yeah, people will say that may be a bit disingenuous, maybe a bit hypocritical. Fine, I'll hold my hands up to that. But the fact is, we didn't lose in 2024, as I say, because of an election date.
You did seem to have a seemingly high number of perverts and deviants and wronguns in your party, though, right? You have to admit that.
No, I don't. I don't admit that because I've got nothing to compare it. I don't know. Harry, I don't know how that...
Was it a uniquely bad intake of politicians, or the other argument goes is our standards now just higher? That all of this stuff has been going on for decades and years, and politicians have always been naughty boys and girls, but they're getting, they can't get away with it now.
Armando Iannucci stopped writing the thick of it because he said, reality, satire couldn't keep up with reality. And that was, what was that, 10 years ago? So this is nothing new, actually. But the point I'm trying to sort of make clunkily in this instance is we got to a stage where we were blown out of the water in July 2024, despite relative economic security, despite pressing all the right buttons in the right order, doing, Rishi Sunak doing the right things for the right reasons. The nation had come to a view that our integrity the reputation for integrity had been damaged and our reputation for economic competence had been damaged. And the joke had worn a bit thin. So all of this stuff was a bit of a sort of psychodrama going on in the background. And people who were around in the dying days of John Major's administration will remember that actually...
Well, Tory sleaze is exactly something...
In the end, we were knocking on doors around the election. People felt sorry for us. They'd passed the stage of being annoyed. They felt sorry. And it was literally people had concluded some time out that it was time for a change.
The majority of the stuff has now come out since you've left government. Is the Whip's office not just one of the most effective cover-up machines going? I mean, a couple of these stories eked out in some form, but if journalists hadn't found out and asked questions and written the stories, this would have all gone into a little black book in a safe and covered up.
Well, there was no black book that I was ever able to find. There's always been this rumour about this black book. I've never actually...
What is it, an Excel spreadsheet?
You make an interesting point, actually, about the role of the Whip's office. We're counsellor, we're accountant, we're lawyer, we're emotional support, we're office managers, we're HR. We do all of that. We do all of that. And it worried me from day one that there are elements of that role for which actually we shouldn't be responsible because we're not counsellors, we're not financial advisors, and we need to direct people to the right kind of help in those circumstances. But more important than that, we need to head these things off sooner. We need to make sure that when somebody comes into Parliament, it's a weirdly intimidating place, that actually there are measures and things in place which can support them when the wheels fall off.
Well, but lots of these people in any other job would have been naturally fired on the spot for for the hijinks they pulled. The problem is, though, that politicians, the last thing you want is by-elections. The last Tory government was blighted by the end of 10 of those in a row almost, and they lost almost every one of them. I think they did lose every single one of them in the end. There is something unique about the Whip's office, though, as a sort of protectorate of the government, as well as... And it does seem to be kind of uniquely, is it uniquely to the Tory party, particularly to the idea of the Tory chief whip and his,
Yeah, the job, I think, what's the sort of one-sentence description of the role of the Whip's office is to get the government's business done.
Yeah, and make the bad stuff go away.
Well, in order to get the government's business done, you need to be able to make sure that there's a reasonably smooth path, and there's for getting legislation through, make sure everybody's there to vote on time, make sure there isn't too much background noise. And so... did we help people navigate difficult times? Yes. Were there the odd occasion where there was activity which was clearly potentially criminal? Then,
right.
There was no, you wouldn't have covered stuff up then. There was, the parliamentary security operation. There was the role of the speaker and all that, and of course the role of the police.
Did you ever pick up the phone and call the cops yourself on someone and say, look, this is outrageous, or put a letter into the cops about some of the allegations that came across your desk?
There were from time to time there were occasions where we had to act officially.
What if it was another whip? I mean, the case of Nick Brown, the former government chief whip, former Labour chief whip, is one of a mystery, because it does feel like sort of whips look after their own, in the fact that serious criminal allegations, I mean, we'll be careful legally here because he's a litigious fella, but serious allegations about him were made at a time when he was doing his job as a minister and later as a whip. The most serious allegations, yet he never got, the Labour Party never went to the police. He was able to quietly stand down and, leave the Labour Party, but, there was never any disciplinary action taken against him. It does slightly look, if you're the one in charge of the discipline, you seem to get a pass. Did you ever hear anything about that?
I don't know about the Nick Brown case, but I do know that, of course, once he'd left the party, the party has no jurisdiction over anybody who's no longer.
Is that a problem for both sides?
Well, I think.
But wouldn't a call to the cops?
Well, I don't know and I'm not going to go down this road because I don't know the nature of this complaint. But all I know is there are, from time to time, there are occasions where there needs to be an official intervention. And that, as I say, wasn't particularly frequent, actually, but it did happen from time to time. And then there was a process, and it involved, let's say, the Speaker's office, which is well geared up for that sort of thing.
In your time in Parliament, you were around for a while before you were a minister and before you were a chief whip. Have standards improved or got worse in the decade or so that you were loitering around the corridors of power?
The good news in all is, and it may account for the fact that that's why we're talking more freely about these kind of things. The good news is, I think the standards landscape, as they like to call it, has been.
It's a very HR word, isn't it?
I'll start talking about pathways in a minute.
No, please don't.
The standards landscape has improved, beyond recognition, both for ministerial colleagues and for backbenchers. And the Standards and Privileges Committee, that process, the Committee for Standards in Public Life, there is much greater scrutiny. There is a much greater expectation and a much clearer idea of what is acceptable and what isn't. What hasn't kept abreast of that, I think, is the means by which individual parties can help train and mentor their own people.
It does seem to be that these parties get these ginormous majorities, as they have in the last two elections, and people that weren't necessarily expected to win some seats may have not had the level of vetting that they think. There might have been a paper candidate here and there that's got slipped through. Is that a problem? Is that a structural problem with the system?
I think it's an area that we have to.
What would you do to fix it?
Get into. I think one of the observations I make in the book, actually, is when it comes to candidate selection, we often select people on the basis of their knowledge, what they're brilliant at, the industry that they came from, their particular policy expertise. We don't test them, in my view, enough against, actually, would you make a good MP? Somebody said to me the other day, what are the qualities of a good MP? And I said, being able to handle disappointment, rejection, compromise, things like that.
Not going to a brothel with a woman you suspected was a KGB agent would be quite high on the list, right?
Well, the thing is, a lot of the problems that we used to encounter came, I don't think were people trying to sort of get one over on the electorate, or necessarily they didn't start their day expecting it to end the way they did. And people did get themselves from time to time into an awful pickle, and there might have been. Your
power of euphemism is quite remarkable.
And there were all sorts of reasons behind that. And actually, most of the time, the first reaction was one of sorrow rather than one of anger. And how can we now put the pieces of this shattered vase back together and make sure everybody who might have been involved is suitably protected? And I mean that in the sensible way, rather than covered up. And I don't think we do that. So I think whilst the standards sort of overview is not better, I'm not sure we have helped individuals as much as we could have done. And I felt, I describe our role as an A&E department somewhere in the work, because we used to patch people up and say, look, on your way back out.
And don't forget that we helped you get on your feet when next time you're going to rebel on X, Y, and Z.
And that was, and I used to frequently think, well, I hope we got this right. And I don't think we did necessarily.
The book's called Ungovernable. Is that what Britain basically is? I mean, you say that the Labour whips, your now replacement will be going through exactly these same problems now, trying to shepherd a 400 odd Labour MPs through the government machine. Ungovernable in what sense? Is that the Tory party? Is that the country? Is that Parliament? Is that just generally?
I think it's a deliberately provocative
title.
Yeah. We did it on purpose. It's about politics rather than individual parties.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting, and there's a bit of me which has some sympathy for the government chief whip at the moment, Alan Campbell, who I got to know well when he was in that role in opposition, because he's got his own fair share of scandals going on at the moment. And
you would like to
read the Sun newspaper.
Well,
I think it's all been covered. It's nothing. It's no. Most of this stuff in the public domain. It's not me. Not wink.
Well, it's the mind boggle. When I read the book, the mind boggles that that you say it's in the public domain, but a lot of it isn't until you put it in there.
That's what I dispute. I think the current stuff involving the current Labour government, we're all reading about. We're reading about was Johnny Reynolds a solicitor or not? Those kind of difficult issues. But my point on Ungovernable is this: Keir Starmer was the sort of opportunity to succeed for him was about 15 minutes. He was going. Now, some of this is his own fault, of course. But it was very, very soon into the new administration.
Well, he came in promising a new broom and change and trust and ethics and standing in the Downing Street garden saying here and never again will there be red wine consumed here, etc. And then he's lost 2 cabinet ministers so far, I think.
And I think the problem also on the wider sort of policy point, to be boring for a second, is for 14 years he is, and his predecessors have been promising that every problem that the country faces can be cured instantly and free of charge simply by voting Labour. Now, people are waking up to the fact that actually that isn't true.
Farmers, pensioners, employers may have something to
pick your particular NHS waiting list, whatever. Suddenly, actually, funny enough, it's not as easy as it was made out to be. I think that leads to instant public dissatisfaction. Don't forget, when Labour was last in office, social media didn't exist. Yeah, they're operating in a totally new world.
Do you think the Tories played a significant part in handing Keir Starmer that sort of carte blanche majority?
Well, and the way I look at it is this, with sort of sadness, is that towards whether or not we agreed with the circumstances of Boris Johnson's demise, it is unquestionably the case that a big question mark was attached to our reputation for
But
integrity.
I think they could have weathered that storm rather than inflict this trust on the nation instead.
That's what happened. So the end of Boris's regime.
Do you regret resigning from that government?
No, I don't think there was any option.
It's on a park bench, I think, wasn't it? I read somewhere that you're sitting on a park bench and sending a tweet. That's how the world works now.
I remember it all too painfully. I also remember, actually, what a civilised conversation I had with Boris Johnson on that day.
Yeah.
But it came to a shuddering halt, and our reputation for integrity took a nosedive. Fast forward a few weeks, and we had the market collapse under Liz's regime after her mini-budget. And our reputation for economic competence went in a similar direction. And for many people, those were the only 2 reasons for voting Conservative. And once those 2 reasons had been compromised, it was a case of, well, why do I bother? So, gift that. So some people went and voted for reform, some people just stayed at home. We all know what happened, the consequence of which is Starmer then emerged on the 4th of July with a absolutely stonkingly large...
Do you think, but you were there in the Fuhrer bunker in the dying days, could have bet, you talk in the book about Sunak and his sort of, he almost lost his heart. His heart wasn't quite in it in the end. He was just ready to go. It was, put it out of its misery almost, let's just get this done.
That wasn't the reason...
Could a different leader have got a bit different result?
I think a different leader could have got a worse result, actually.
Right.
And I don't think, by the way, I think that the timing of the election wasn't a cut and run decision. It was to try and see if there was some way that we could jolt everybody into realising what the stakes that we were dealing with. And there was a considered view that actually, rather than things can only get better,
things could only get worse.
Things could have got worse.
Well, you kind of knew that things were going to get worse when you left. That Labour talk about that £22 billion black hole and all these things they've had to, were said they were funded and weren't. Was it not the fact it was, some awfully tricky stuff is going to coming down the pipeline? Let's let the other guys take the heat.
Well, I think there was difficult stuff coming down the pipeline anyway. I think that there was going to be a difficult summer of small boats. We had the
prisons crisis.
We were committed to
the country's essentially broke without putting up taxes.
And we were committed also to the compensation payments for the victims of infected blood, for the victims of the post office horizons,
all
things
billion.
Which we, by the way, were thoroughly supportive of doing. It wasn't.
You just hadn't worked out how to pay for them.
Well, it wasn't that. It was the fact that what they did is eat into our ability to then offer a whole range of further tax cuts. And the thing about Jeremy Hunt and Rishi is that you sort of did know that they were keeping an eye on the numbers. They were concentrating on the figures. This was, what they were doing.
May vary, yes.
Well, I think that would be a little bit unfair. I mean, Rishi was right in what he predicted during the election campaign about what Labour would need to do. He was right about what he thought.
Tax rises looks a bit low, to be honest.
He
might be a bit higher than that.
He was right about what he thought might happen if Liz Truss was Prime Minister. So he has been proved on two major occasions to be right about his economic forecast. However, but the nation had turned away by then. The nation had decided.
It looks like the Tories, from where I'm sitting, looks like they're out of power for a generation at this rate. There's, Kemi Badenoch's floundering around on 21% in the polls. You've got Nigel Farage on the right eating into you. He's 2 points ahead of Labour today. It's a completely unique situation that the Tory party is in, that it needs to fight a massive Labour government while also it's flanked on the right.
But I think probably both of us have been through enough elections to realise that it's not.
Things can change pretty quickly.
Things can change quite quickly, and also if you look at
that's what Badenoch seems to be clinging to.
But if you look at the Labour majority at the moment, there is a disproportionately large number of seats which are being held by majorities of 1,000 or less.
So you think it doesn't take much swing back?
It doesn't take much of a gust of wind to see quite a lot of those going back. And also, I do think the reform offer is at the moment people are still hacked off with the Tories, and they're underwhelmed. Underwhelmed.
You poured a bit of petrol on that, I think. Yeah.
Well, there is. I think you overestimate that. The musings of a former nobody in terms of the effect.
We won't quite sell this interview as that.
In the effect on public voting patterns. And so I think that the Conservative brand. We all know this. The Conservative brand is going to take a while to get back.
Is Kemi the leader to do it, though?
Come back to that. Short answer, yes, but come back to that. So you've got this brand restoration we've got to do. Labour are underwhelming the people who went to them expecting and hoping for a quick fix and instant relief. So the automatic alternative there, who's going to hoover up those sort of dissatisfied voters? But it's going to be reform. But I think we're a long way off people thinking that reform is necessary, got all of the answers. I mean, I don't know what their, I don't know what their policy is on, hospital.
Does it matter though? Is it not they're just so fed up with the Tories? There's some people are so jaded with the new government that why not give the other guy a go?
But we're talking about 4 years. We're talking about a long time. We're talking about a long time for all of this comes to the boil. So I think the idea that we take today's polling as a prediction of what might happen in 4 years' time, as we know, is a dangerous.
spoken like a true politician, even if no one now retired. Is there a comeback? Would you? What do you reckon? Are you done with politics for good?
Do I? It's been a very interesting
journey,
very interesting experience since the 4th of July next year, because every politician, whichever party they represent, has learnt the hard way, which is you become ancient history very quickly, and the telephone these days doesn't ring off the hook with people dying for you to join their board.
Well, they're presumably phoning off the hook, shouting at you for writing this book and telling all their sordid secrets.
I took, I suppose, what you could call a calculated position. I didn't do this lightly. I tried to deal with the concerns literally on page 1 of the book of why me? Why should I say that? Is this not a breach of these ancient customs?
Little birdie told me that some of the cabinet office took some of the juiciest things.
I mean, there's a process.
Yes,
I don't know if people know this. The process you have to go through with the cabinet office of a former minister. It's called the Ratcliffe Rule. It's all public domain. Yeah, I thought the civil service, the manner in which they addressed some of the things in the book was entirely fair. I don't think I had an argument with them about anything particularly.
Well, the mind boggles about what didn't make it.
And don't forget, you know, my publishers, Macmillan's lawyers, would have had a good old comb over that.
Well,
as
our lawyers are watching too, so we better be careful what we say. But was there anything like jaw dropping that you were annoyed didn't make it? You know, was taken out by the censor's blue pen?
I mean, there were some things which were interesting rather than jaw-dropping, which were just a bit of colour, but probably fell foul of the Radcliffe rules around things like national security and stuff like that.
Well, that's the juicy stuff. That's the juicy stuff.
But you know, it was. I didn't have any complaints about the way in which they went about their duty.
I would love to read the director's cut. Simon Hart, Ungovernable, it's out now, out today, out tomorrow, out this week.
Out this week.
Out this week. It's great. It's a cracking read. It's fruity.
It's meant to not necessarily all be completely comfortable reading. It is meant to make us ask ourselves some questions.
Well, there we go. We'll leave it on a very worthy point. Simon Hart, thank you for coming on Never Mind the Ballots. Join us again next week. Don't go anywhere. Subscribe on YouTube. We'll be back.